Welcome everyone to the discussion of plastic pollution and solutions in Prince George's County, informed by the Emmy Award-winning documentary, The Story of Plastic. I'm Martha Ainsworth. I'm chair of the Prince George's and this Maryland chapter of Sierra Club Zero Waste Teens.
And I'm Paula Posas, the Deputy Director of the Maryland Sierra Club, Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club.
This event was set up specifically to give the Climate Commission, County Council, and municipal leaders an opportunity to view the film as background of the plastic problem and its relation to climate change, and to discuss what we can do in Prince George's County to prevent it and mitigate its impact. I'm pleased to say that we are expecting more than 24 county and municipal leaders and their staff, and several of them are already here. So we have 4 distinguished local panelists. We have Andrea Crooms, Yinka Bode-George, Chris Williams, and Honorable Monique Anderson-Walker. And you're going to hear more about them shortly and their thoughts about how we can deal with the plastic pollution problem in Prince George's County. So the role of the panel, I want to make a point, is to launch a discussion, and we're looking forward to hearing your ideas too. You'll have an opportunity to ask the panelists questions and offer your own reflections on what we can do here in Prince George's County.
Great. The meeting is being recorded, and after a brief review of the issues raised in the story of plastic, we'll be hearing from each of the panelists back to back for 5 minutes each to allow at least 30 to 40 minutes for questions and discussion. If you have a question for the panelists, please put your name and the question in the chat and to whom the question is addressed. After the questions, we'll open the floor to your thoughts on what we can do in Prince George's County about the plastic pollution problem. To offer a comment, please put your name in the chat with the word comment. We will ask you to unmute to make your comment, and we'll take the comments in the order received. As there are quite a few people who may want to comment, please be as concise as possible so we can accommodate everyone. Now I am pleased to introduce Janet Gingold, Chair of the Prince George's Sierra Club Group and member of the County Climate Commission, to review the key messages of the story of plastic. Janet?
I hope you all had a chance to watch this film, because even for folks who have a good grasp on the facts and the science, it really is a gut-wrenching experience. Let's call to mind a few of the main ideas of this film. With voiceovers of promotions from the plastic industries through the years, we see visuals of water choked with plastic and people living on lands buried in plastic waste. It just screams of environmental injustice. Children playing and working amidst it as if that's normal. People on the other side of the planet searching and sorting through endless piles, finding things we threw away, but there is no away. The story of plastic is a one-way trip from extraction of fossil fuels to waste, with only a very short fraction of its life providing usefulness. As if the solid waste and litter were not a sufficient problem, each step along the way releases greenhouse gases and other pollutants, from fossil fuel extraction and transport, to refining and manufacturing, to managing the plastic waste, often by incineration. It all impacts our oceans, our waterways, our landscape, and human health. Over half of the plastic ever produced was produced since 2000. As the market for natural gas and oil decreases because of the transition to renewable energy, the industry plans to make and market more and more plastic. The film highlights the false narratives about plastic waste that have been pushed by the plastic industry, that our plastics problem is a result of poor waste management, that we can fix it with more recycling funded by taxpayers and managed by local government, that the problem is that people don't put things where they belong. The real problem is that they make goods that we will use for 20 minutes out of materials that will last for centuries. The industry also tells us that plastic trash is made of fossil fuels, so it's a source of renewable energy. Yes, it yields energy when burned. Plastic is a high energy carbon compound. Watching it combust, you can feel the heat being produced. But do you want to breathe that air? It's full of carcinogens and respiratory irritants, in addition to greenhouse gases. And as more and more mountains of plastic accumulate, there will be increasing pressure to burn it to reduce it to toxic fly ash and airborne pollutants. About 40% of plastic produced globally is packaging. It's designed to be thrown away after a single use. We like to think that when we put it in the bin, it gets recycled. But 32% of plastic packaging ends up in the environment. 40% goes to landfills, 14% is incinerated, and just 14% is collected to be recycled. But only 2% of plastic packaging is effectively recycled into something as useful as the original product. The rest is downcycled to lower grade materials that may not be recyclable. This image from the film tells it all. With the glut of plastic being produced, solutions like recycling and litter cleanups just can't keep up. You can't fix this overflowing bathtub by bailing with a teaspoon. You need to turn off the tap. But how can we do that? We need to reduce waste by re-engineering products for zero waste in a circular economy where we reuse, repair, compost, and effectively recycle. Even with a well-designed waste management system, plastic litter pollutes Prince George's County. Our stores keep selling the stuff, we keep buying it. This not only fills up our landfill and litters our land, it perpetuates fossil fuel extraction, petrochemical plants, and climate impacts that endanger human health and well-being, with unconscionable impact on frontline communities of color. Our local heroes keep battling the litter, but community cleanups are not going to solve this problem. We need to turn off the tap. Martha?
Okay, thank you, Janet, and thank you for pointing out these highlights for those who weren't able to watch the film. Now you know what the main points were. So now we turn to the question we're here to answer. What can we do in Prince George's County to prevent and mitigate the impact of plastic pollution? I'm very pleased to introduce our first panelist, Andrea Crooms, the director of the Prince George's County Department of the Environment. Andrea is a lifelong advocate for the environment, an attorney, an economist, and climate scientist with 20 years of leadership experience in environmental regulation and climate change mitigation. Before joining the Prince George's Department of the Environment, she worked at the U.S. Department of Energy, serving in multiple leadership roles at the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. She's also served at the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, and the Environmental Protection Agency, among others, and in local government as a public defender. She has a Juris Doctor degree from the University of Kentucky, Master of Science in Energy Management and Engineering from the New York Institute of Technology, and a Bachelor of Agricultural Science in Natural Resources Management from the University of Delaware. Welcome, Andrea.
Hi, thank you for that introduction. I apologize for being in my car. I think as many people have seen, there's a lot of zebra coverage going on right now, and I'm still dealing with the ongoing joy of also having animal control under my purview. So one interesting thing about the county and the way it's run, and I know that folks who live here, it can be challenging to figure out who you ask about what, because the Department of Environment actually is responsible for all solid waste, responsible for stormwater management, clean water, clean air, sustainability, animal management, and a myriad of other small things that one would have not always expected was part of the job. So it's definitely, I've been with the department now since June, so it's been about 4 months, and I keep on saying it's been a master's class in everything. I mean, it's very easy to come out, with a degree in environment, to have worked for the big federal agencies, to come and be like, oh yeah, I know the Clean Water Act, I know the Clean Air Act, I know RCRA, I know CERCLA, I know what I'm going to do. And then when you come in and you're really working at it on the ground, it's a totally different experience. But I mean, that really leads me to the thing that I really took away from the film, really was the way that the burden is put on us as individuals, which is really not the way to deal with this. I mean, I think you know, I think folks may have heard me talk about this before, but, you know, people are intimidated by climate change. People are scared of it. People are turned off from it. You know, I mean, there's those of us who are in the environmental community are passionate about it, and we cling to the, you know, we look at every article and every study that comes out, but there's the rest of the world that is constantly like, well, this is always put at me. It's such a huge problem. I don't really want to deal with it. And then there's a lot of blame placed on individuals and a lot of responsibility placed on individuals. I hear a lot like, we need to educate people, we need to educate children, we need to do this, we need to do that, in terms of, you know, we need to turn off the lights, you know, turn off the light switch, turn your heater down. And those things are wonderful, and they're a part of contributing to the solution, but it allows then industry to, you know, put a happy face and a greenwash face on things that we know are a problem. And so, you mean, there's every level of government here that's involved. I mean, at the local level, we are, you know, we're aiming for zero waste. We are committed to recycling. We are committed to reusing. We are committed to trying to get folks to see the value of things that they can reuse, switching from, you know, paper towels to reusable towels, things like that, to change demand, to show those that are coming to sell us things that that's not what we're interested in. But we can't do it just at the home level. It does need to happen at every level of government. And Prince George's County has made some real commitments to climate. I think that, you know, the Climate Action Commission is asking us to make more, and that will be, you know, the decision of the executive and of the county council. And, you know, I look always to democracy comes from the streets, right? It comes from our willingness to advocate for the things that we want as residents, and pushing for what the priorities are, because our, you know, our elected officials reflect those priorities in the decisions they make. But it's beyond just that. I mean, to, you know, to an extent, local government can put a band-aid on the problem, but the reality is that it's hit the femoral artery, right? So it's much larger than that. And so we need to be advocating at the state level. We need to be advocating at the federal level. We need to be advocating at the worldwide level. I was Monday morning, I looked at the information put out by the Pope and was reading sort of the information that came out of the Vatican from the World People's Conference, and I'm always emboldened by this Pope and always inspired by this Pope. I'm a lapsed Catholic, but I still, there's something about this Pope always drawing me back in about, you know, thank you for the people and the advocacy and the things that you're doing, but it's the role of governments. It's the role of, you know, it's the role of leaders. It's the role of these mega corporations to do better. And they're not going to do better on their own. So it really is the role of government to rein them in and say that when we say we're moving away from fossil fuels, we're moving away from them in every aspect of our lives, not just in our cars. And in our, you know, in home heating and things like that, but in every aspect. We can't allow this change to happen where they're so afraid of losing income that they just switch to a different stream. So it's every level of government, it's advocacy, it's, you know, like I said, change comes from the streets. Democracy is in the streets. Democracy is in investigative journalism, and democracy is in, you know, the demands that we make of our elected officials.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Andrea. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Yinka Bode-George, who's one of our next panelists. Yinka Bode-George leads the Environmental Health Program at the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators. The program focuses on zero waste and circular economy solutions, toxic chemical protections, and sustainable development. She is an environmental health advocate, passionate about creating environmental justice and sustainable development through public policy and community building. She conducted research, led programs, and engaged in advocacy and organizing to promote health outcomes and undo drivers of environmental health inequities. Before joining the NCEL, National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, she was the public policy and program manager for the Maryland Philanthropy Network, a program manager for the Maryland Environmental Health Network, and a board member at the Maryland Public Health Association. She holds environmental science and a BA in health administration and policy from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. She received her Master of Health Science degree and is pursuing a Doctor of Public Health in Environmental Health from Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. Welcome, Yinka.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Sierra Club, for inviting me to join this discussion today. I'll say I'm a bit under the weather today, so apologies for my stuffiness. Yes, my name is Yinka, and before I get started, I want to acknowledge that I'm currently on occupied Piscataway land, and I'm really honored to join this panel because I'm a proud County District 6 and State District 24 resident here in Prince George's. So as mentioned, I'm the Environmental Health Manager for the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, or NCEL. And as a national organization of state legislators, NCEL works to inform, inspire, and facilitate state-level environmental policy action, all through a lens of justice. So today I'm going to further highlight public health challenges caused by plastic pollution issues and highlight the state policy landscape as well. So the documentary, of course, highlights the issues created across the plastics life cycle, from the petrochemical extraction and refining processes to create the materials, to the use of toxic chemicals for durability in plastic materials, and then to the eventual landfilling or incineration of these materials or exporting to different countries. Of course, plastic creates a multitude of environmental threats. And given the location of petrochemical facilities, waste incinerators or landfills, the burden of these environmental threats, like the air pollutants from petrochem facilities and incinerators, or the water pollution from landfills leaching into waterways, are disproportionately on Black, Brown, and other communities of color and low-income communities as well. Plastic production and management is also a huge greenhouse gas contributor, so we have to be thinking about this issue from a climate crisis perspective as well. When you factor in all of these considerations, it's clear we have a problem. So how do we tackle the extent of this issue? We need comprehensive, justice-oriented strategies in order to shift the necessary systems to positively transform our communities. Since this issue is multifaceted, we need a multitude of solutions. There are source reduction strategies like the single-use bans and refill and reuse policies. There are strategies that improve the recyclability of products, like material recovery infrastructure build-outs and recycled content policies. There are also strategies that eliminate the toxic substances within those recycled products, like bans on PFAS, a toxic chemical frequently used for durability and water and grease resistance in food packaging. So we don't continue recycling back these toxic substances as we recycle products. And then there are strategies that place the onus of managing the end of life of these plastic materials on the producers of them. We often refer to those as producer pay policies or producer responsibility policies. So before I highlight some bill models, I'll mention that at the core of transforming systems to address plastic pollution is shifting away from our culture of single use and product disposability, as mentioned, and promoting a culture of reusable products and product circularity at the onset of design, essentially a health and justice-oriented circular economy. So because I work at the state level, I'm gonna highlight a few examples of enacted policies from this past legislative session that work to tackle plastic pollution, but really, as mentioned again, all levels of government are critical to really make an impact on these issues. So for enacted bills, I'll start with Colorado, H 1162. This bill phases out single-use plastic bags, polystyrene cups and containers, and reverses a law that prohibited municipalities from taking action around plastic pollution. In Washington, SB 5022 creates a minimal recycled content for plastic beverage containers, household cleaning and personal care bottles in jugs and trash bags, and prohibits the sale and distribution of styrofoam food service products, coolers, and packaging peanuts. It also makes plastic serviceware like your straws or utensils available upon request for customers. In Maine, LD 1541 is the country's first producer responsibility for packaging bill, which would increase effective recycling by requiring producers of packaging products to cover the cost of life of those products and better design the products to be more recyclable. In Connecticut, SB 837 bans food packaging products that contain PFAS, and again, PFAS is a class of chemicals known for heat resistance and the ability to repel water, grease, and oils. And they've been associated with degrading health, so it's very important to eliminate their use in packaging products and other materials. And finally, California had a very big year for plastic pollution policies, and I'll just highlight two bills from California. SB 343 brings truth in labeling to many plastic and packaging products. After a phase-in period, manufacturers will no longer be able to put the chasing arrows symbol on items that aren't actually recyclable. And then AB 1276 reduces plastic foodware waste by making single-use foodware only available upon request of customers in food establishments. So of course, we're hoping our own state of Maryland can get our plastic bag ban over the finish line, a producer pay program established, a deposit return system established, and other critical plastic reduction and elimination efforts to make our communities healthier. So thank you again. I'll stop there. Thanks for having me, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions.
Thank you very much, Yinka. And Maryland has a start. We have banned, or at least Prince George's has also banned expanded polystyrene foam, Prince George's County and the state. And we also have in the county banned plastic straws and yard waste bags. So we're on our way, but we have a lot to go. And I hope that some of those bills you mentioned will actually come to fruition in Maryland. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Chris Williams. He's the president and CEO of the Anacostia Watershed Society. He leads the implementation of the mission and strategy of the organization, working with the board of directors and staff to develop and implement watershed conservation and education initiatives, to build partnerships, raise funds, and steward the resources and the long-term sustainability of the AWS. In addition, he directs the public policy and advocacy work for AWS. Prior to joining AWS in 2021, he served as Senior Vice President for Conservation at American Rivers and as Director of the Freshwater Program at World Wildlife Fund, guiding and supporting watershed conservation programs across the US and in Latin America, Asia, Africa, and Europe. He holds a Bachelor of Arts from University of Washington at JD and Masters in Environmental Law and Policy from the Vermont Law School. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much, Martha. I would like to formally request that I don't follow Yinka because her presentation was really, really good. But nevertheless, I'll try to forge ahead. Thank you to everyone for attending this webinar about this really important issue, and thank you for inviting me to participate. I watched the movie. I put it off to the last minute and just watched it last night, so I'm freshly shocked and awed by the story that it tells. In the Anacostia watershed where I work for the Anacostia Watershed Society, which is dedicated to the conservation and restoration of the Anacostia watershed in Montgomery County, Prince George's County, and the District of Columbia, the DC region's other iconic river. And the Anacostia watershed, we are fortunate in that when we look at that cycle of plastics from the wellhead to disposal, we don't have a lot of oil and gas exploration in the Anacostia watershed, at least not yet, thankfully. We don't have a lot of huge plastic plants. We don't have a lot of incinerators burning plastic, but we are on the tail end of that story. We are receiving all of that waste in the Anacostia watershed in a whole variety of ways. The film, one thing, the impression that the film kind of created, which we all know is not the case, is that these images of plastic waste all over riverbanks and all over trees and in the water is a developing world problem. It's very much a problem in the developed world as well, including here in our home watershed. Just today, as I was thinking through this talk, I went for a walk on the Anacostia River and decided to do a little sampling. I came up with a few things. This is just one of many plastic bottles that are supposedly recyclable, but I doubt very much if this will make it into the 2% that gets recycled, that gets up-recycled. Here's a multi-layer packaging sample that I picked up on the banks of the Anacostia just a few minutes ago. And here I have a single-use plastic that I picked up on the banks of the river just as I was going on a walk a few minutes ago. And these are, believe me when I say, just samples of a lot of litter in the river. And this is a particularly nice day. On a day when it's been raining and there's a lot of extra storm water rushing down the streams into the Anacostia, the garbage, including a tremendous amount of plastics like the samples I just showed you, litter the riverbanks. So this is very much this sort of end, where does it end up question is one that's of particular import here in the Anacostia watershed. We've made great strides in the Anacostia watershed to deal with these issues. I don't know if you can see this because I think there's a glare issue, but this is a picture from a bunch of Anacostia watershed staffers working in the river back in the early 1990s. And I think you can see there that they're pulling tires out of the river. The story of the Anacostia to some extent is the story of externalities of the plastic and petroleum industries. Tires were more plentiful than fish, seemingly, in the Anacostia at one time. And it wasn't the tire manufacturers or the tire retailers who cleaned up all those tires. It was the blood, sweat, and tears of volunteers and members of the community who pulled those tires out of the Anacostia. And that continues through the cleanups and sort of things that were featured at the beginning of this talk. It really is the sweat equity of people living in the watershed and along the rivers and along its streams that are cleaning up these externalities, these messes created by the plastics industry. One of the programs here at the Anacostia Watershed Society is we've set up a series of trash traps at mouths of tributaries to the Anacostia that pick up trash. Unfortunately, they can only pick up floating trash. There's a lot of trash that sinks that they can't get. And it makes a small contribution to cleaning up the trash as it's in the plastics that are coming into the river. But probably more importantly, it provides some really good data about the type of trash that's coming in. So we let these trash traps operate, and then we go out periodically, we pull all the trash out of them, we sort it out, we categorize it, we figure out where it tries to figure out where it came from. And we get a sense of, it's a good sampling of the percentages of the sort of plastics and other trash that are coming into the river. The data that these trash traps have produced have been instrumental in creating advocacy arguments that led to the styrofoam ban in the jurisdictions around the watershed in Montgomery, Prince George's, and the district. Helped it with advocacy around the straw ban that was put in place, and is helping with the bag bans and bag fees that to a lesser or greater extent have been passed or are in process in jurisdictions around the watershed. And these trash traps have also provided some preliminary data that says that these bans are working. And I took that to heart as I was watching the movie last night, and several of the speakers were talking about the need for action by government, and what is government but the collective will of the people? The government to say, no, these products you can't manufacture, these products you can't use and distribute in our jurisdiction. And styrofoam is a very good example. We have good data on styrofoam. Before the styrofoam bans were put into place, about 22% of the trash that we caught in our trash traps. And if you accept that as a good sampling, then about 22% of the trash that's coming into the Anacostia River from its tributaries was styrofoam containers, cups, and that sort of thing. Now, after the bans have been in effect for a period of time, that percentage has dropped to 3%. So it's a very dramatic decrease in styrofoam in our streams and in the river because of a legal ban on styrofoam. We don't have as good a data on plastic bags because plastic bags tend to sink, so we can't really get good data from our trash traps on those. But the anecdotal evidence of the amount of plastic bags that you see on the banks of the river and hanging from trees and that sort of thing is that while that problem's not gone and not all jurisdictions have taken action, it certainly is still an issue. There has been a noticeable reduction because of the bag fees in DC and other local laws and regulations concerning plastic bags. And similarly with straws, we don't have good hard data like we do about styrofoam, but the anecdotal evidence is that the straw bans are starting to have an effect. So I find that encouraging, that through advocacy and action and ultimately actions taken by governments, we can, at least on the receiving end, on the end where I work in the Anacostia River, where we're receiving this plastic, we can, through advocacy, through public action, and through government action, start to reduce some of this plastic in a very significant way. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was really informative and good to hear all that data and information. Now it is my distinct honor to introduce our next panelist. The Honorable Monique Anderson Walker represents District 8 on the Prince George's City Council, where she has served since 2018. She is a lifelong resident of the county and the first African-American woman elected to serve District 8, which includes Andrews Air Force Base, Camp Springs, Clinton, Forest Heights, Fort Washington, Glass Manor, Marlow Heights, Oxon Hill, and Temple Hills. She serves as Vice Chair of the Transportation, Infrastructure, Energy, and Environment Committee, and is a member of the Education and Workforce Development and the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committees. She also serves as a member of the Metropolitan Council of Governments, Chesapeake Bay, and Water Resources Policy Committee. She's active in the community as a member of the Prince George's County chapter of the Links Incorporated, the Community Foundation in Prince George's County, and St. Anne's Center for Youth, Families, and Children. Her commercial real estate firm, Fleur de Lis, is headquartered at National Harbor. She holds an MS in real estate development from Johns Hopkins University, an MA in political science from Howard University, and a BA in international studies from Emory University. Councilwoman Anderson Walker, welcome. We look forward to hearing your thoughts.
I just want to thank you so much for inviting me, Martha, Paula, Janet, and thank you to the panelists that went before me. You all were phenomenal. I don't want to be repetitive, but I think we see the same issues without question. I also want to mention that my colleague, Jolene Ivey, who's on the county council with me, has been a huge advocate for environmental justice. And collectively, we have looked for opportunities along with Tom Dernoga, who has really been on the forefront in many ways in attempting to work on legislation to reduce poisons, whether they're in landscaping materials, whether they're straws. And of course, that's not a poison, but I guess we're finding out it is. But we're really looking to work together. The biggest challenge is making sure people are educated, because in many ways it's out of sight, out of mind. I represent District 8, which is right on the Potomac River and on several inlets of the Potomac River. So I see what we saw in those videos. I see plastics and other garbage washing up. But if you're a little bit more hinterland, you might not see that. And the impact might not be immediately understood to those. So education is very important. What we see is that like in the documentary, this generally impacts people disproportionately. And it is an environmental justice issue. So we want to make sure that it is promoted as being something that is hurting communities. And let me explain what I mean by that. We know that floodwaters, rainwater, and in many cases, just inflow and infiltration challenges that we have within our WSSE systems, water systems, that's whether it's the sanitary system taking water away or the drinking water coming into one's home. Any properties that are downstream of known poisons are more likely to have families that are impacted, their health impacted. An example of that is Joint Base Andrews and the known entity of having PFAS on their site. The meetings that I've had with the commander of Joint Base Andrews, they've been fantastic and very transparent. But the truth is, the federal government does not intend to wind down the PFAS use on Joint Base Andrews until 2025, which means it's not prioritized to wind that down. That can be viewed as social environmental injustice, because we do know that there's a correlation between adverse health impacts and PFAS. We also know that we have a weak infrastructure system that WSSC has agreed they do have, with inflow and infiltration. The infiltration is the problem, because those groundwaters that are carrying the poisons get into the piping. The other reason for education is that when we have these pipes that are cracking, they're generally lined with the plastic. The pipes aren't replaced immediately, but there's a lining that's put in there, a Teflon lining, so a plastics lining that allows for the infiltration to be less. But that too has an impact on anyone who's receiving their water that way. I think if we're looking for solutions, education is certainly always at the top of the list. But the other is focus on health and wellness and what health and wellness really is. Maryland has the most, if not the most, then definitely one of the top is one of the top educated states in the country. We have multiple health systems here, NIH, we've got Adventist Healthcare, we've got Johns Hopkins, we can go on and on and on. But we see that many people are reactive to their health as opposed to being proactive with wellness. So really focusing on wellness and what that means, having a safe environment, having a clean environment, having a thoughtful process in place to make sure that health is first and foremost before business, before profit. All of those are things that we need to promote, that health and wellness in that way. Lastly, I do want to speak about landfills, which I think Yinka brought up. I also live in an area where we have a landfill that is winding down. The landfill should have wound down probably a decade ago, but was allowed through government waivers. So we, as a government, have to be very intentional about taking care of our community and recognizing where our community is being attacked. We are able to wind down this landfill finally, but there's so many tactics used because there's such a strong lobby for business when money is unfortunately, when money is the focus for some, that could mean that people will suffer and be marginalized, as we did see in this film. I'm very grateful to be here today. A little bit, I don't know how I feel about following all these phenomenal people who had to speak before me, but this is something that we recognize as being critical. We're not at a point where we can allow things just to linger. We've got to be very reactive. One of the scariest truths of today is that we no longer are able to ship out our recyclable items. So we have to understand what that means for our community. That could very well mean that we will be storing plastics in our backyard, as we saw in the video, in the documentary of people having these items stored. We need to just pivot and think differently about how we want to live in the future, and maybe even drop some of what we think are conveniences for us and look at what might be a short-term convenience, but a long-term burden. And that educating people in that way as well. So thank you again for the opportunity to come here. I will mention just one more thing, because as someone who has worked in commercial real estate and understanding development, we need to question how properties are developed and what kind of materials are going into houses that people will close up during the winter and breathe that same stale air, and maybe that decomposed plastics that are or plastic fumes that begin to emanate from those convenient features that are in our newer housing. But all of this, I think, needs to be discussed out in the open, and we need to have a concerted effort to really focus on wellness in everything. Thank you again for your time and the invitation.
Thanks very much, Councilwoman Anderson Walker. Really appreciate your coming today. And to all the other panelists for sharing your views. We'll now take a few minutes for any questions asked of the panelists. And I'm wondering, Paula, do we have any in the chat?
Mr. Hank Cole has a question.
If you look at, I like to look at the interconnections of things. And first of all, the big banks and their big investors heavily fund the fossil fuel industry. The fossil fuel industry is a big supporter of plastics. They have actually paid for advertisements that have given the false impression that plastic can be recycled. They've spent millions of dollars on that. So then you have the banks and the oil companies. Then you have the Safeways and the Giants. Okay, and they distribute this food wrapped in whatever it's wrapped in, whatever kind of plastic. And you see fewer and fewer glass bottles. You see everything in plastic. So what I'm getting at here is, it's one thing to go after legislation, but I think a very helpful parallel strategy is to go after the banks, to go after Bank of America, which is a major investor in fossil fuels, to go after particularly the local food distributors like the Giants and the Safeways and et cetera, et cetera. Now, the reason why I think it's a good strategy is it builds momentum for legislation. And at the same time, these kinds of campaigns have actually made real changes. For example, how many packages do you see that says no GMO, right? Or no gluten, gluten-free, or pasture-raised milk? In other words, because the consumers begin to demand certain things, these stores start to respond. And, you know, maybe we can't get at the oil companies here, but we certainly can have an impact on what is local, including banks that fund the fossil fuel industry, and the supermarkets and the Walmarts, et cetera, which distribute everything in plastic. So I just wanted to ask the speakers what they thought of those kinds of strategies to start as a way of educating the public and as a way of bringing the issues to the fore of legislators. I think we need something besides just the usual lobbying, because this is such a huge problem, as everyone has said. We need to do more. I'll stop. Thank you.
Thanks, Hank. Thanks so much for that input. I'm glad you brought up the stores. I don't know if everyone's aware, Sierra Club has done surveys of watching shoppers come out of the stores. The 7 main chains in Prince George's County, over 7,000, most recently in 2019, over 7,000 shoppers observed, and 88% of the shoppers are leaving with single-use plastic bags. Not a reuse, only 6% are using a reusable bag. And that has not changed since our first survey in 2012.
Wow.
To put another perspective on it, Americans use about 100 billion plastic carryout bags a year. It comes to a little more than 300 per person. You apply that to Prince George's County, and we are using almost 300 million. single-use carryout, plastic single-use carryout bags here in the county. That's what's happening. So there's a lot, I like the fact that you're saying there's a lot we can do locally. And this is something that we can do something about. So I'm wondering if any of the speakers have anything in response to what Yinka said. Oh, Mary Lehman.
Thank you for that. And thank you for those comments. Yeah, there can be pressure put at so many different levels. And I think that's a good point about the banks and investments. I also saw in the chat where someone talked about one of the recommendations of this work group being that the county divest I assume they mean its pension funds in fossil fuels. A number of governments have done that. A number of universities have done it. Montgomery County did it to lesser or greater extent. I attempted to do this in either 2017 or 18 with the county's pension fund. And I can tell you, I believe it seems so long ago, we ended up getting a resolution passed, which is not binding, of course. I think it's an excellent idea to pressure governments to divest in fossil fuel holdings. It's very powerful. Think of the successful movement to divest for folks to divest in holdings in South Africa as a way to oppose apartheid. That can be very, very effective. What I ran into, doesn't mean you don't try and do it. What I ran into is strong opposition from the public safety unions, the police and the firefighters unions saying, these pension funds are our lifeblood and we're not comfortable with that. We're with you in spirit, but we're not sure we're ready to go that route just yet. And so that's definitely one thing to think about.
Thanks, Mary. Does anyone else have anything to add? I wonder if Councilwoman Jolene Ivey wants to jump in here.
Hello, I missed the question.
Oh,
I just heard my.
Oh, sorry, Mary was just talking about divesting.
Yeah, no, I saw Andrea Crooms is on the chat at least. I think that she'd be an excellent person. Has she spoken yet? I got on late.
Yes, she's spoken.
Okay, because she was mentioning that the county should do that. And it seems like a great idea to me. I don't know what that would look like, how that would work exactly, but it sounds like greater minds than mine have already been giving it some thought. But sounds like something to give some serious consideration.
What do you think we should be doing about the plastic bags and the stuff in the river? How can we deal with that more directly?
Well, as far as getting there to be fewer, Prince George's County still hasn't gotten the authority from the state to do a tax. So the county council at this point can't tax single-use bags. I don't know if that will change in the upcoming legislature. From what I know, there's a greater interest in doing the tax than doing the ban so far. But we'll have to see. I mean, if you ban them totally, then you don't have to worry about them being there anymore. Whereas people will still pay for plastic. And I know at Aldi, their fees a little bit higher than the nickel or whatever that we're asking for. Of course, their bags are a little, sturdier as well. But people are clearly willing to pay, although you do see more people coming with their own as well. And even I know I'm guilty of it. If I'm going to Aldi, I make sure I have my bag. I have forgotten my bags when I go to Giant, but when I go to Aldi, I'm thinking, oh my God, I've got to bring my bags. Please don't let me get out of there at the end and not have my bags. And, my council office has invested in a lot of reusable bags that we give out at community meetings. And I do see them out and about. So I think making those more available for people. There are those who in the legislature who have some hesitation about people reusing bags. They think that there's some unsanitary thing involved. I mean, I was pretty surprised to find that out because you can always wash a bag. It's not that big of a deal. But in any event, those are the kinds of things that the council could do. Maybe tax it if we ever get the authority from the state, which maybe it'll happen this year. I mean, I was in the House of Delegates how long ago fighting that battle, and I cannot believe it still hasn't happened. Monique Anderson Walker's husband's in the House of Delegates, and although I wasn't with him at that time, we did serve together. I'd already left, and I remember him putting in a bill to ban plastic bags. What I don't remember is if that was for just the county or for the state. But I know, Baltimore City has gone that route, and it'd be interesting to know what their experience has been.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I see Andrea Crooms has got her hand up, and then Yinka. And I would point out that Prince George's County does have the ability to ban plastic bags without going to the General Assembly, and also to require stores to charge for them. Those things, it's only because it's a tax that Prince George's County has to go to the General Assembly if you want the revenue. So with that, Andrea, and then Yinka.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of highlight some of the, and I guess you guys are going to see these in a week when the climate plan draft comes out. But the Climate Action Commission has put together some pretty interesting ways that the county can be responsible. One was the opportunity to divest from fossil fuels in the overall portfolios of the county, whether that's through the pension or through other investments of the county. They put forward a lot of lead by example procurement, where the county is purchasing things to purchase the most environmentally sustainable things, the least, to not purchase things that are single use. And just a lot of ideas about how the county can be representative of the actions that we can all take. That don't even require legislations. They would just be choices that were made by the county. And so those recommendations, I think, were really interesting and kind of outside of the box in terms of opportunities that we would have at the local level. Obviously, they're recommendations. They're by the Climate Action Commission. They've not been adopted by anyone, but I think it's been really productive to have citizens brainstorming on these ideas about what local opportunity there is.
Great. Yinka?
That was great, Andrea. I also just want to flag to Hank's comment, in response to Hank's comments, when we're talking about these issues and solutions, we should also do a better job of centering the economic opportunities that exist in shifting to a reuse-centered economy, right? Think about all the jobs that would be created from the material recovery processes and things like that. I have a friend doing phenomenal work in Baltimore City. Shout out to Dante Swinton. He has started a glass recovery cooperative, right? These are the opportunities that we should be highlighting. I think a lot of people struggle to imagine a future.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing you can do.
Struggle to imagine a future that is plastic less, right? And don't really know what that looks like in the real world. But it's important for us to talk about all the pilot programs that's going on across the country. In California, there's entire cities that are endeavoring on reusables in restaurants. Of course, bottle bills have existed for a long time, but even expanding that to a national level. I think it's so important for us to talk about the successes and also the opportunities to really expand our economic development at a local level from a culture of reuse.
Fantastic. Chris Williams has his hand up.
Thanks, Martha. Again, another reaction to what Hank had to say. I think his points are spot on. And I think one of the things that we need to think about is how do we mobilize consumers and shareholders of these large companies around plastics the same way that they've been mobilized around climate change. There's been a lot of consumer pressure and shareholder pressure put on petrochemical companies in the climate change space and in the fuel space, whether it's gasoline for cars or natural gas or what have you. And so, as the movie pointed out so eloquently, they're moving that investment, seeing the handwriting on the wall, they're moving that investment from fuels to plastics. And now pressure needs to be applied there. The messages of the movie need to be taken to these boardrooms and these shareholder meetings and these consumer groups to shine the same sort of sunlight on the investment in plastics and the booming production of plastics that have been shined on fuels for these years to great effect.
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, there was a quote in the story of plastic that I guess I've seen this about 5 times already, but there was a quote that I picked up this last time that really struck me about plastic per se. To a far greater extent than any other product, plastics are driven not by the demand for them, but by the supply. The story of plastic is fossil fuels finding a new form and a new place to flow through the economy.
Yes, I wrote that quote down as well.
You did?
It struck me the same way, yeah.
That's great. I've seen a lot of comments here from Teresa Cullen, who's the president of the Alice Ferguson Foundation, in the chat. And I'm wondering if she'd like to say something.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Martha. I just appreciate that. I just saw something posted about Prince George's County's public schools. So we're Hard Bargain Farm, Alice Ferguson Foundation. I know some of you know us, have been to us either as a student or as a teacher, or I think member of our board, I believe. So thank you so much for having us this evening. We clearly see an impact when we work in Prince George's County schools and have students with us on trash and the composting and recycling and the circular economy that we saw very early on the presentation. We also do a lot of trash cleanups. We have a program called Trash Free Schools. Specifically, we worked with high schools in Prince George's County. So I do think education is very impactful in how we're going to change mindsets and the future. I'm glad to see, I see in the chat, Mary has posted about taking some recommendations to Prince George's County Public Schools. You know, we talked with them about building programs in the schools, and, you know, it's an infrastructure thing as well. Camp Schmidt is their overnight account place. If those of you have been there, there's about, I think it's 500 acres Prince George's County has. I mean, Prince George's County is a very special place. I'm going to say a shout out because I'm an alum, Prince George's County Public Schools. I went to High Point High School. I'm now an executive director in the county, and I want to see things, I want to, you know, be successful. And I want to work with the county on the trash and so many things. So come on out to us. We do cleanups throughout the county, 300 cleanups in the region. I know it doesn't, that cleanups isn't there, but bring your kids. We give service hours, let's the education, come on site. We have the only living building in the state, the 13th in the world. It's on our property. It's in Prince George's County. It's the only one in the state. And people need to know that. We're out of Piscataway National Park. We're on Piscataway land. We have a chief buried on our site. There's a lot in Prince George's County, and I want people to know about it. I want people to get out there. We have 600 acres of gorgeous national land in Accokeek, Maryland. But you know what? We get that trash and we get that stuff coming down from Andrews Air Force Base right through the Piscataway River, right through the Potomac, and everything from DC falls right down to us. Yes, we can see Mount Vernon, it's beautiful, but we are picking up trash. We are picking up bottles and plastic and tires, picnic tables, shopping carts, you name it, it's in that river. Our children are supposed to wade in there. We want them canoeing in there. We want them playing in there, and it's filthy. So come on out and help us. Thank you, Martha.
Great. I'm wondering whether there's anyone else who has a comment to make on what we can do locally to get.
Martha, there were a couple questions. Should I share those?
Sure.
Okay. So one of them was from Bernie Robinson. What are the best solutions to dealing with plastic shrink wrap of boats? And I'll go ahead and say the second one, and then we can see which panelists want to answer. Another question is, if Maryland passed legislation to study the viability of recycled products like glass, does anyone have an update on this? From Alex Hurdle. So those are two questions, and it looks like Mary Lehman has her hand raised. Mary.
I don't know an answer to Alex's question. I can either talk to him offline or have our legislative library, the General Assembly Library, look into that. I am not aware of that study. It might have been initiated before my time. I was just elected to the legislature in 2018, so I'm not aware of that. I did want to share very briefly that I am putting in a bill similar to an amendment I actually got passed when I was on the county council. Then Councilman Olson, whose second term overlapped with my first term, he got a strong reauthorization of the county's recycling bill, and really kind of stepped up the goals. And it was an excellent bill, and it's in effect now. But I got, at the request, I think, of an environmental group, I wish I could say it was my own idea, but someone came to me and said, would you consider an amendment to prohibit the use of plastic lawn and leaf bags, and require that folks, that individuals and businesses that are sending yard waste to the county to send that in either compostable bags or boxes, or even just put it loose in cans so it could be thrown into into the yard waste truck. I did that. I met with very, very little resistance. Surprisingly, I remember then Councilman Patterson worrying out loud, and it was a legitimate concern that come back. But he said, but I agree with what you're trying to do here. The amendment went through, and that has been the law in Prince George's for I don't know how many years now. At the time, Adam Ortiz, who was the head of the Department of Environment, said, I'm all for that, but I know we're going to get some pushback. And at that time, Anne Arundel County had been sending its yard waste to Prince George's. And Anne Arundel said, well, we're not going to send our yard waste there anymore, because we're certainly not going to make our residents stop sending their yard waste in plastic bags. And, Adam was frustrated by that. But then within a couple of months, Andrews Air Force Base came to the county and said, look, we have a lot of improvement to do here. We want to do right by the environment. We want to do better. We read about the fact that the county is not allowing yard waste to come anymore in plastic bags. And so we now want to send our yard waste to, and Andrews, I don't know how many, Councilwoman Anderson Walker must know how big it is. Andrews is enormous. I know it's the largest employer in Prince George's County. So that was a real win. On the one hand, Anne Arundel pulled out, but then Andrews said, well, we're going to go ahead specifically because you changed this policy and send all of our, lawn and leaf and grass clippings to you. I am putting in a bill to require in 2022 to require the General Services Administration in Maryland to not allow any yard waste, grass, shrubs, tree branches to be removed from state properties in plastic bags.
Very good, Mary. That was one of the great things that you did while you were on the council. A lot of good points been made. We're saving the chat. I'd like to thank the panelists and everyone else for sharing your views. I've been, while you all were talking, I've been making a list of some of the things that were mentioned, and I'd like to share that with you. Plastic pollution solutions that we've talked about, and some that we haven't talked about that have come up before. And we've hit on a lot of good points here. I've tried to keep up with it. Things you can do as an individual. We didn't talk so much about. But actually, I think if we just started talking about what each of us is trying to do to prevent using single-use plastic, it would go on for pages. Education was stressed, highlighting, Yinka was talking about highlighting opportunities. And that's that there are real economic opportunities for some of these alternatives. The refills, the reusables, recycling firms and so forth. And these are things that we can invest in. There are a lot of potential policies on plastic carryout bags. There's the ban on, Monique mentioned this, single-use plastic or single-use items on request. I think all of us who've ordered food on carryout during the pandemic know how much stuff we have in our house that we don't want. Forks, knives, spoons, packages, little condiments, and we have the mustard in our refrigerator. So this would really cut back on a lot of plastic. A ban on we have a ban on expanded polystyrene foam in Prince George's County. And that is no longer, thankful. And Chris Williams in the Anacostia Watershed Society has noticed that there's less foam in the river. They're now producing rigid polystyrene No. 6 food containers, which are not accepted in the recycling center. There's no market for them. So they're on the shelf and they're basically single-use, toss and don't recycle. Montgomery County has actually gone and banned those too, and that's just going to effect in January. Incentives and subsidies for businesses developing reusable packaging or refillables. Now, there's a lot of discussion about that in DC. Tax the distributors for packaging that's not recyclable and use those revenues to strengthen recycling. Yinka mentioned the beverage container deposit. That's critical, I think, for the Anacostia watershed. The last time we went on the river with you folks, Chris, the thing that you notice is all the floating plastic bottles. They're like little mushrooms all over the river, mostly plastic water bottles. These deposits, they're excellent at removing litter, in addition to improving recycling and the quality of recycling. The minimum post-consumer recycled content laws, extended producer responsibility for single-use packaging, truth in labeling in California, and then banning all these toxins. And I'm sure there were more, just I need time to go through this chat at the end, but we'll send this to you. Yeah.
Could I share a couple more that I saw?
Sure, go ahead.
From the chat. The chat is very hopping, so I'm not going to be able to catch everything, but a few of the things I saw. This is from Todd and Elaine iPhone. It would be good for Prince George's and municipalities to support the National Break Free from Plastics Act in Congress. So that's like even a national one that we want to add a new section. And
the print's going to get really, really tiny. But yeah, Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act is there, sponsored by Senator Merkel and Representative Lowenthal, and that has a huge portfolio of anti-plastic stuff in it, including a national bottle bill, extended producer responsibility, bag fees and ban, a whole bunch of stuff, more than I can list. Go ahead. What else?
So then another one was Delegate Lehman made the comment that PGCPS also has a climate action work group right now that I serve on along with Councilwoman Taveras. It will be making recommendations to the PGCPS administration on composting, recycling, green buildings, renewable energy, electric buses, artificial turf, and more, which is exciting. And then there were a couple more down at the bottom. Let's see. Ben Simasek asked, would like to hear ideas for mitigating disproportionate impacts from policies like bans or fees for customers. Walmart can eat the costs of their externalities, but maybe it's harder for a small bodega.
Yeah, okay, very good. Well, anyway, we're working on this. We'll circulate this, and we also have some resources that you can, we really recommend this CIEL paper on plastic and climate, the hidden costs of plastic plant. It is just an excellent resource. And in fact, we have a whole bunch of resources on the Sierra Club, Maryland Sierra Club Zero Waste website down here at the bottom. But there's another show called Plastic Wars that was on Frontline that's excellent on this issue. Greenpeace has done this paper on the flat claims of industries claiming that their stuff is contributing to a circular economy when the plastic is not. It's a survey, so it's a lot of evidence there. And I wanted to point to something that the county produced a couple of years ago, which is worth taking another look at. the Zero Waste Initiatives for Prince George's counties, and that's on the county website. But we will circulate all of this. So I'm going to thank everybody for coming. Thanks to all who made it possible, the panelists. I'm going to unshare here. The panelists, Gary Young, our technical support, Janice Oppeld and Don DeLong, who are helping behind the scenes and feeding us things from the chat. And I wanted to mention that if you have not had a chance to view the film yet, it is viewable until the end of October. It expires, that link expires on November 1st. So feel free to watch it if you haven't had a chance yet, because a couple people signed up pretty late. So good luck. And thank you all. Look forward to working with all of you on this issue, and stay safe.
Thank you. And if you wouldn't mind, if I could have a quick word, because it's starting to gnaw on me.
Yeah.
If we have better elected officials or officials that are more aligned with our way of thinking, the rest of it's so much easier. So to the extent, like knowing that this is an election year coming up, if you could just work hard to support like-minded people, whether it's on the state level, the county level, the local level, it's going to make all the difference. So thanks so much.
I'd like to maybe close with something in the chat. First of all, the chat had so many wonderful appreciations for all the panelists. And if you didn't see those, please, panelists, have a look, because people had a lot of appreciation for your comments. And the comment from Bernard Can, who's the mayor of Morningside, he said, very good dialogue. The biggest thing is not letting up on this issue. Also, as leaders, we need to share concerns in our networks, and as well as solutions. So I want to thank everyone for the lovely spirit of this evening, and encourage us to press on. Thank you.